Marguerite, welcome. It's nice to have you here. I feel we talk every week anyways, but it's nice to see you in person and to be here in the Netherlands with you. What I wanted to do is just start out by having you tell a little bit about your background. You're doing some interesting work and on an interesting project, but tell us how you got to this point where you are now a founder of a company.
Yeah, right. Thanks, Kurt, for having us here today. And meeting in person is a pleasure. So my background is in pharmacy. I've always been very interested in drugs and how they help people. I've always wanted to do something that made a difference to patients specifically. And so that's what I started out. And I quickly discovered that I loved research, feeling very powerful if you could help create new drugs to help patients that were not helped yet with the drugs that were available to my colleague pharmacists that I studied together with. And on that journey, I figured out that there's a group of patients that gets ignored a little bit, and those are patients that have some drugs available to treat their diseases, but don't always respond very well to those drugs, so they're undertreated. And especially if you have a chronic disease that eats into your life, and I have friends who lost jobs over this. And I felt compelled that I needed to basically turn my efforts towards that patient population and see if I could come up with ideas for drugs that were very commonly used, where there was potential for improvement with the know-how and technology that we have today. So that's where I come from.
So you founded a company, Amplio, and really what you're doing is you're looking at inflammatory conditions.
Exactly.
Talk a little bit about the problem that you defined and how you went about solving that particular problem.
So again, this comes from patients being underserved, where there's loads of drugs available to treat the population, but they're not always being optimal. They've been around for many, many years and nobody really looks at them.
What's the primary condition you're targeting?
So autoimmune diseases, so inflammatory chronic diseases, which are very common. 1 in 10 people develops an autoimmune disease, and they are for life. And usually people get them somewhere between their 40s and their 60s, so it's for life for many, many years. And if you don't treat them, then they basically shave off life years, quality of life. People lose their jobs within 2 years of diagnosis very often. So this is serious stuff. And in my last job, I worked with a very old drug that was developed 75 years ago. And I felt like, well, there's this drug, there's potential in it, making it so much better if somebody would just have a good look at its pharmacokinetics, which is how the body basically treats a drug once you take it. Once we dived into that, we figured pretty quickly, actually, we figured out a way to make that drug work so much better by just trapping it in the pro-inflammatory cells. So that's what we've been working on. We've been proving that in early non-clinical studies. And currently we're trying to get this idea into patients and prove that it works for them, and basically have them respond better, faster. That's also something that we really want to go after. That once you get diagnosed and you end up with the rheumatologist, that when they prescribe you something, that within a few weeks you're doing better, not within half a year or a year. So that's our goal.
So you're looking at one of the populations would be rheumatoid arthritis, prevalent disease, growing, right? It's growing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
As its prevalence, and it has to do with aging populations, right, of people. Also, there's more factors in society that are causing inflammatory conditions, and so you're looking at and the drug that you identified was methotrexate as a drug that is widely utilized,
Yes.
typically in combination therapy.
Exactly.
Its late onset of efficacy mandates that in many cases the rheumatologist will have to prescribe a biologic, extremely expensive, the side effect profile of methotrexate has been proven to be very safe. But what you did was something truly unique. You basically came up with almost a new therapy, right? In that while methotrexate's part of the cocktail, it's not the entirety of the solution that you conceived as a possible remedy to the problem, which is this late onset of effect with methotrexate. Tolerance is impacted. The patients don't tolerate it typically well. A large population of them don't, meaning they just get frustrated.
But that's true for every medication. People often forget that. Every medication has side effects, and every medication will have a group of patients that cannot tolerate that particular drug. And that is true for methotrexate as well. It's a very small population, it's about 5 to 10%. If you look at other drugs, it's very often bigger. So from that perspective, it made sense for us to target methotrexate because it's so widely prescribed, because it's so very well tolerated. But as you said, most people need to take other drugs on top of that to basically get true efficacy out of their treatments. And when we looked at it in detail, cellular level, what we saw was this drug is just expelled from its target cells too quickly. Had it been developed today, that would have been addressed before it ever came to the clinic. So why not address it now? And the great thing was that what we found out, this combination that we figured out that could work, actually was completely new, novel, innovative. So we managed to get patent protection, both in Europe and with a little conversation also in the US. You helped there. So yes, please smile, because we were very grateful for your network of people that helped us there. This combination is something that, from a regulatory perspective, the FDA and the EMA here in Europe, they've seen this before. They recently saw it with Paxlovid. What you do is you add to your active pharmaceutical ingredient, you add a PK booster. And that's exactly what we did. But for rheumatoid arthritis, for autoimmune diseases, this is revolutionary. This has not been done before. And we also target a different mechanism that really traps this methotrexate very well into these pro-inflammatory cells. So we foresee that we get the same efficacy that patients now get when they add methotrexate and biologics or JAK inhibitors or what else that you have out there as a rheumatologist to treat these patients.
But the potential is it's a larger population that could be treated on basically a monotherapy.
It's basically every single patient that tolerates methotrexate, which would be 85 to 90% of that patient population.
Right. And so there's an opportunity here to treat them faster on a safer drug at a lower cost.
Exactly.
That's the model. So
exactly.
If we transition away from the discussion around Amplio and what you're doing there, let's talk about the construct of how you execute on this and where the IBE played into that. So you show up at the IBE, and what was your expectation when you showed up?
So we showed up after we'd had Amplio Pharma for a couple of years in Sweden, and actually been through an incubator there and program and everything. So when we showed up here, we figured, okay, this is something we know, but hey, the network, that's only network itself is already worth doing this for, right? And then we were confronted with all these lectures that were basically based not in theory, but in we've lived this. And that was a very big difference from programs that we'd seen before, where people kind of like theorized about how things would work if you set up a company around an idea and what you needed to go through, to actually meeting people who'd actually walked that walk. And that was a very pleasant surprise. And that on top of actually being able to, again, from the floor up, build our communication around this idea and this company that we wanted to actually get off the ground. I mean, it's a pharmaceutical product that we want to develop. We also want to actually develop a pharmaceutical company.
So give me an example of what was missing from your knowledge base prior to coming here. You've been through an incubator, right? you've spent a couple years, so you weren't rookies at this, but then you came here. What was it that you said, I didn't quite understand it properly, or we need to think about this differently, or we need to look at it differently?
So for me, it was actually seeing other fellow startup entrepreneurs discussing our idea and think of how they would communicate this. That was because whenever I walked into a room, I was just bursting to talk about what it was that we were doing and how great it was. And to take that step back and say, okay, so here's the idea. How would you present this? That was a first for us, to kind of like have others help you communicate and pinpoint things where they saw value. And then the international thinking around it. Even though me and my co-founders, we work within the international industry, and we do think very international from that product perspective, we never really thought so international from a company build-up perspective. So we kept it very little in Sweden and then in the Netherlands. And when we came here, we're basically, no, look outside. Look outside of your little known world and see who you can grab with your story. See who actually also feels an interest to be part of the journey that you've started on.
Well, and I think too, we were very fortunate that the story you're telling scientifically resonated with 3 of the top clinical advisors, clinicians in the world in this topic, and that was confirmation for me, because not being a scientist, right? It was comforting knowing people that I know who I admire and I trust their insight and perspective really saw something unique and special about what you're trying to do. From a standpoint of the discussions we had around the behavioral, what were your takeaways from the behavioral stuff that we did?
So one part of the IBE is actually this opportunity that you give to all the participants to have a look at their own behavioral patterns, those that you were born with and those that you develop, and learn how these influence you in a group and how others in your group are influenced by that as well. But also learn that nothing is that much written in stone. If you take a good look at it, you can change some things. Just to be aware of it. And I think what the IBE here was so special about it as compared to other programs that we've been through is that you're kind of like, yes, you're a scientist. You're all most of you are scientists. You went through studies that were science-based. But now you're becoming an entrepreneur. So you need some other things in your toolbox. And you already have them. The thing is, you just need to kind of like cultivate them, make them stronger. That was something that was different from other programs where it was more like, well, we're trying to give you the little Bible that shows you how to build a company. This was more like, we're trying to give you a toolbox that you actually already have. We're not even trying to give you the toolbox, you have it. We're just trying to look into it together with you and see which ones you have and how to use them. So that was the difference. And I think that helped a lot. And then, of course, also you personally actually came on board talking about your son and his needs for methotrexate, and then saying, so I have a connection. So please shut down a little bit, Marguerite, and listen to my story, which is, again, kind of like, so here's a tool in your toolbox. You have ears. Listen what other people tell you, and use that when you tell your own story. That was, I'm coloring a little bit. It was an embarrassing moment for me, and it was a pivotal one. And that's what I think this IBE gives you. It gives you these pivotal insights into who you are and how you can develop that to actually help you on that journey that you're so excited about. I mean, all of us that startup companies, we're very, very excited about our ideas.
It's what you just described is what I had talked about earlier, and I talk about all the time, is that idea of that, you hear someone, you listen to them, you interpret what you think they just said, and then you react to that, and you don't get to those next two levels, which is understanding what they were thinking, not what they said, and then understanding that there's an opportunity to think together. And that's what you described earlier, that idea of you come here and there's an international group of people with different backgrounds and different experiences, scientific, engineering, business, and then you have the opportunity to sort of tell them your story, and then they come back to you with what they heard. And now you start to then have a conversation where you understand what they were thinking, and you said, I thought I said this, they heard this. Or we talked about it this morning, that thing that's called the curse of knowledge, where you know something so well. Yeah. And you assume as you're talking, they understand and see what's in your head, and they don't. They have no idea what you're talking about, right? I was just at lunch, and one of the gentlemen has this very complicated scientific process that he uses that would be a component of drug development, right? It's unless you're a scientist and you are familiar with the industry, it's very hard to understand exactly what he's doing and why it's different. And I said, well, just start with the exit. Just start with the company that has the problem that you're going to solve. And don't talk about the technology. Just say, here's the problem. This is the way they've been doing the science. It has not yielded high outcome, or it hasn't been effective in producing the outcomes that were anticipated or expected. And here's what we're doing to disrupt that and change that. And I said, then go into, and by the way, this is what we do. Yeah. And he is struggling with that. He's like, well, maybe we could do that, or kind of. And Rob was sitting there at lunch, and he's like, you should do what Kurt said, because people aren't going to understand your science. So it's that understanding what others are thinking, who are looking at it not from the scientist perspective, but from the investor perspective.
Exactly.
Right.
And most of us come from environments where we've worked for several years in teams, but with scientists in those teams. So whenever we communicated, we started off at that science level of communication. And now you start to kind of like, okay, there is a product, and if you want me to, I can talk about it for like hours. But let's talk about the economical part of it. Let's talk about the difference that it makes in saving money. Let's talk about its economical viability, because there is a pathway for it to actually be a product on the market that can be sold and bought by those that need it. Is it in the hospital? Then it needs to make that pathway into the hospital purchasing department, right? If it's a drug, then it needs to get to that formulary as a preferred drug when you're in the United States, for example. So let's talk about actually those things, and then explain to an investor that, see, all these little things are in place. There is a pathway. It's straight on. There's a nice rolling book that we can just kind of follow. What we lack now is somebody who says, I'm going to put in some risk money here, and then in 2, 3, 4 years from now, you're going to exit, and you have a plan for that as well, and it's in place. And when that exit actually happens, I make my money back with a good return. And that's the risk that I take. And because all the other things are in place, and because you have a group around you of people that confirm that you guys know what you're doing, I feel comfortable enough and I feel compelled enough to actually support this idea. And that's what you're trying to learn, right? To get to that communication of, I need to build a team, not just of scientists, but I need to build it of people that know all about the company. And then in that team, I need to actually enroll people that finance this. And they also become part of that team. So they need to feel compelled. They need to feel that they do this to make money, but there's a huge choice of different opportunities with risk profiles that they can pick from. So they need to feel a personal connection as well. and you need to build that. And that's something that felt that the IBE program really focused on, teaching us that we have the tools in the box to do that. We just need to kind of like learn how to use them.
Right. So I think that you did a nice job there, and people may have missed it, but you talked about the idea that there are multiple clients, right? The pharmaceutical industry, in particular the device industry, are unique in that you have a patient, right? And you have that patient journey relative to the disease state or condition that they have. And then you have the physician, the clinician, who is prescribing, the treating, but then you have the environment that they work within, whether it's a practice or a hospital, right? And then you have a product that's prescribed in your case. And you're right, there's a formulary, right, that makes a decision whether it will be or will not be a possibility for treatment, meaning it will be paid for or not be paid for. But then you have a payer, the insurer, and then you have an employer who buys the benefit package, right? And they have a vested interest in seeing that that patient or employee has a healthy outcome.
Gets back to work and be productive as soon as possible. And so you have, when it comes to these healthcare products, including drug products, you have all these stakeholders. And you need to kind of like balance out how you can get them on board and who's going to be the big winners. And there's always also going to be some losers, but how those losers can actually be okay with losing some. Because actually, even though your new drug product may be a little more expensive than the methotrexate that is on the market today, they still save big bucks because they don't have to pay for the biologics that come on top of that methotrexate that physicians prescribe today and that patients are using. So there's all these stakeholders that you kind of need to know where they come from, what it is that they want to hear, what it is that they need to see for them to support you in this idea that you think that is going to make such a big difference. And everybody has different drivers. I mean, our driver is to get a drug product that is so much more effective. And that's a personal passion. But not everybody has that personal passion. So we'll need to find other things in there that they have passion about. So saving money, for example, down the line for payers is one of those.
So what are your big challenges now? You know, a year later from us having met, you've accomplished quite a bit. Like you said, you've extended your patent portfolio. You've brought on world-class clinical advisors. You've got a protocol ready to go into phase 1, ready to go into first in human. You've got a number of things you've done in a year.
Yeah.
Okay. But what are your challenges?
So I think the challenge that we face today is a challenge that startup companies face several times during their startup phase. Is that at a certain moment you find somebody who will invest some money, and then you can actually take a step. But in that time, while you take that step or several steps, you need to get the next investors on board, and that is a very hard thing to do. And it takes a lot of time and effort and a lot of no's. So you need to kind of like have that thick skin. It's not personal. It will come, and we will find the next. We found the first one, so we will find the second one. But that's basically where we are now. We're trying to raise capital to actually run a clinical trial, and this is also a stage for companies where you move from needing thousands of dollars to hundred thousands of dollars. You're talking, instead of raising $100,000, you need to raise $2 million or $5 million, now, right? So and that is the difference. Raising that type of money, and actually showing people that even though we've talked about this a lot. What is a company and what is a company in becoming, right? You're kind of like, there's the star that is in development, or you actually have the sun and it's shining. And so we need to now convince people that even though we are still a nucleus of a company. We don't have a lot of employees. We're running on gases all the time, on fumes. There is enough power to actually take that next step. So there can be enough trust in the team to actually accomplish that next step, which is getting human data.
Well, I think though that you have a greater advantage than many startups in that you have a clearly defined problem. It's a significant problem. There's a lot of money in this area, so it's not like it's an area that doesn't garner a lot of attention from an economic perspective. You've got clinical support that's well respected and very strong. You've gotten it this far on a relatively small amount of money. You've been offered a term sheet. So while you are looking for money, it's now getting the best terms relative to aligning the capital with the inflection point that the company is at and where it needs to go. So there's a number of things that you have in place that are much more advantageous than many of the other companies that we're talking to that are in this particular cohort of participants at the IBE. So I think sometimes we lose sight of the fact that you're in a much better place. The problem is you want to go to that next step, right? And so it's
and I think that's actually where everybody is all the time, right? You want to go for that next stage. You want to go take that next level, and sometimes it takes an effort to say, but we've been at it for almost 7 years, and there's been a lot accomplished in that journey. Never fast enough, never far enough. We always envisioned that we would have been in a better place today, proof of concept, phase 2 study running. But you're absolutely right. In a year, if you look back, or in 2 or 3 years when you look back, you see that significant steps are being taken, and so there is progress, even though today's problem feels like it's as big as always. It is different where we are today as compared to when we came to the Netherlands a year ago, or when we started the company 4 years ago, or when we actually filed a patent 7 years ago.
Where are we a year from now? Where do you anticipate we'll be a year from now? If you and I were sitting here.
We're going to have a similar conversation. We're raising money again. And we are, again, facing hurdles, trying to get people to commit to the journey. At the same time, I'm going to be proudly telling you that we have in-human data now. We have clinical data. So those key opinion leaders that now say, this is fascinating. We really want to see more. We want to see that it's actually keeping within the safety borders that we know and we feel comfortable with, that we actually can show them and the world, yes, it is.
Well, you won't, your phase 1 is, you not only will you have the safety data, but you should have efficacy too within that, right? That's one of the things now that phase 1s are not just about proving safety, but it's developing a body of evidence that shows that there's efficacy, even though it's a very small patient population. That you're starting to see that there's a signal here that the concept bears out. So
that's the difference from our situation to where many people are when they are developing drugs. They're developing new chemical entities, and their first in man is basically a very small study where you just show that it's safe to use. Whereas we can actually go to a study where we say, well, that is part of it. But we're also able to actually find out so much more about what it is that this PK booster of methotrexate is going to do to the efficacy of methotrexate on a cellular level. And that again, a year ago, I knew that there was a group in Amsterdam that was looking at this. Today, they actually own 5% of the company, which they'll exchange for their collaboration and their efforts in actually doing all the clinical chemistry that we'll want to do in this phase 1b study, which we would never have done otherwise. Because again, then when you have to buy everything, you just buy what you really, really need, right? But if you collaborate with somebody who's also very interested and has been looking at this for ages, then you get a total different collaboration, and it's a different situation.
I wouldn't say you buy what you really, really need. I say you buy what you can afford. Right?
Well, yes. And so what we would have afforded is say, okay, we have the surrogate plasma level of methotrexate, and that's what we're going to show, and that's sufficient to go into phase 2. But now we can actually do a proof of concept within the phase 1B, which is, I mean, phase 1B is per definition, you don't look at the pharmacodynamics, you don't look at efficacy. But with this collaboration, we have the ability to look at efficacy surrogates.
Yep. So you'll have an extended body of data that is not, for and economically, it's very efficient with regard to how you're capturing this. So, a year from now, you'll have patient data. The other thing too, you said you'll be raising money. Hopefully right now we can look at this particular raise as a mechanism whereby you line up that next tranche of money so that it's based on a milestone that would bring it in, as opposed to going back to the street as if you're trying to raise and haven't not already done the work or been out there having the conversations. So I think it's very exciting. I think it's very exciting, the people that we've been able to attract to this over the last year. I think it's great that the IBE was able to be a conduit to help you make connections in the United States, start to have discussions with people about money, understand where the value might be in what the company represents now as far as components and progress. So I think there's so many elements to this that have really advanced, and I'm excited to see what the next year. So
me too, and I'm especially excited to see 1 year from now who have joined the journey. So who are part of the company now, and who are going to help us execute the next step then again. So it's a matter of bringing the idea further towards an actual drug product, but it's also a matter of bringing the company further towards a pharmaceutical company where you have all those different components from R&D to market access to regulatory, all those things coming together.
And most likely that's going to occur through a partnership. I mean, to scale something like this, it's going to be a partnership. It's going to provide that kind of, that resource base. But Marguerite, this has been wonderful.
Thank you.
To catch up in person and to share the story with our audience. Thanks again for being here. I'm very appreciative of you taking the time, being here. And I love to have a seat and watch the journey. So
it's my pleasure, and you're right on it. So
take care. Thank you.
Thank you.